I'm a fan of Waking Times and your writing. And so I'm really honored that you are agreed to come and have an interview with me.
Awesome. The feeling's mutual. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Max.
Yeah, so I was wondering if we could start with your story, your journey, how you got to awaken, how you got to doing the things that you do now to give back to the world. Kind of just share with us your story.
Yeah, okay. I could easily take up the whole hour with that one. But I'm gonna give you guys the abbreviated version. I'm gonna stick to the highlights, and I'm gonna stick to the things that I think a lot of people are going through. First and foremost, during my childhood, I don't want to say it was unloving. I had a lot of love in my life. I had a lot of grace and attention from my mother and my grandparents, and but like a lot of people, it wasn't perfect. There was a divorce when I was very young, and my older brother, I just found out a couple of years ago that he didn't like me from day one when I came home from the hospital, and so he was a source of trauma, and it was there he was very violent with me my whole childhood. But my parents were always in conflict, always in arguments. I mean, when I look back, the memories that I have of childhood, there's always yelling going on, there's always screaming, there's always blaming, there's always finger pointing, there's all this kind of stuff, and so I was born into a world with that kind of drama, learning how to be people. That's where we're learning what the world really is and how to interact and be part of this world. And so a lot of the things, a lot of the patterns and programs that we tend to operate with through our whole lives are situated. They're put in place at this point of our life. And so looking back from the perspective I have now, I can see how that really affected my sense of security. I never really felt safe in this world, and I can get to that in a little bit. But I think that really influenced my interest in all things conspiracy, right? Interested in uncovering like the truth about the world, because I never really felt safe even in my own household. I would come home from school sometimes and my brother would just be mad. He would just be mad, as an older brother was. And there were a few times where he was just so mad for no reason, and I came home and for no reason at all, he would just shove me or hit me or push me or something. And I had to have stitches a couple of times from that, So you come home and then, a few minutes later, you end up in stitches just for arriving into your house. It tends to influence. That's really where my work has taken me, is understanding how the subconscious is affected by the programs and patterns that we attach to ourselves when we're young, but also the manipulation and the manufacturing of the world that we live in today, and how that the world very much aims to influence our unconscious decision-making process. And so again, like a lot of people, I had these experiences, these traumas in my childhood, and I didn't understand. I had no way of processing them. I had no way of dealing with them. And so I was left with basically like a basket of negative emotions: anxiety, fear, doubt, insecurity, overwhelm. I mean, these are all things when I go back to just, when I look back at being, 5, 6, 7, 10 years old, I can think, I was like, yeah, I was afraid, I was overwhelmed, I was anxious, I was uncertain of myself. And so having the wisdom that I have now, I've learned how to let go of a lot of those emotions. But at the time I did what most people do. I tried to escape those emotions. And so I started, for me, just like with a lot of people, the escape comes in the form of chemical or substance abuse. So by the time I was 12, I picked up one of my grandfather's cigarette butts and took a toke of that and was like, whoa, this is a different feeling. This takes me someplace, takes me away from the discomfort I felt within my body and my emotional system, right? I didn't have the knowledge at that time to understand it as such. But I definitely remember that first puff of a cigarette thinking, wow, this is an escape, right? So by the time I was 14, I was, like stealing liquor and beer from the fridge, from my mom's fridge and from the alcohol cabinet. And by the time I was 15, I was blackout drinking from just, drinking liquor straight. And so part of this is, a big part of this is a person running away from their feelings, but not understanding it. But another part of it too is just cultural. I mean, alcohol was everywhere. It was everywhere in my household. The events that my mom took us to on the weekends, everybody was drunk and drinking all the time. Of course, you watch movies, television, there's beer ads, the Keystone Light Girls. I mean, it's the cool thing to do. So it's in a big way, these are the things that we do to try to fit in and feel safe amongst the tribe that we're in. So in my case, the tribe was drinking a lot. There was a lot of conflict and turmoil. And so I participated in all that in order to fit in order to feel safe. So by the time I turned 18, I moved out of the house right after I turned 18. I got my own apartment and all that cool stuff. I was a very independent person. But I fell into a whole other scene, the party scene with party drugs. So for a lot of people know what this is. I mean, this was the mid '90s, the late '90s. So it was ecstasy, acid, these kind of drugs. And unfortunately, I made some bad decisions back there and got stuck. Tried out methamphetamines and got stuck in addiction to that, which is one of the nastiest things you could possibly be addicted to. So I spent a few years like really heavy into that, and it took me many years, probably 3 or 4 years, to really get that out of my system and clean that up. But the emotional, the mental damage that it did to me, and I don't mean like the damage it did to my mental health, let me say it like this, was pretty severe, and I didn't understand it as part of the recovery process from drugs at that time. So I went for help. I went for help to the psychiatrist and the psychologist and all these people, and that's where I was told the help was. And my life really didn't start to turn around. Well, let me just complete this story because, like I said, we could take up a whole hour, but let me just highlight this part. So, in my downward spiral from the meth addiction, when I was in my early 20s, I started substituting, like a lot of people do when they engage in self-sabotaging behaviors with substances. You quit one thing and you pick up another. You quit one thing and pick up another. You drop this form of chaos and then add this form of chaos. The chaos is different, but it's still there. You still have that vibrational match to what you're used to. So I swapped out the methamphetamines for Adderall, for Ritalin, these sorts of things. I went and gamed my psychiatrist, or gamed a psychiatrist, into getting that stuff, thinking that it would help me to get off. Then when I really needed to get off that stuff, it was cocaine, it was pharmaceutical pills, Xanax, Valium. Back then we had Rohypnols, there was OxyContins, Vicodins, pain pills, like you name it. And so I finally hit rock bottom about, what was I, roughly 26 years old? Really, it was probably close to 27 years old. I hit rock bottom. I was a mess. I was drinking alcohol every weekend. I mean, I was drinking alcohol every day, but on the weekends I was doing all these drugs and just like lost in myself, got myself hooked on porn like so many men do. And it was just a total mess. And so I went to my doctor for help at that time. And because at that time I was already married. I've been married now for 25 years. And at that time I was already married, and I needed help. And like a lot of people, like, you don't get to that point where you ask for help, or you seek help, until like things are just absolutely unbearable. And we call that rock bottom. A lot of people call that the dark night of the soul. And I'm talking like the pitch black, darkest night of the soul. And so when I realized that I was at the end of my rope, and that like I was, having suicidal thoughts, and, just like, what's the point of being alive at this point? I was like, well, I better get some help. So I went to the doctor, and, immediately filled me a script for antidepressants. I took those, had severe reactions to those, called him a few hours later, and he was like, don't worry, you'll get used to the side effects. I was like, doc, this is crazy. These are not things that I want to get used to. And so I set those down, and he had set up an appointment with me for like a leading psychiatrist in my town, Austin, Texas at that time. And so a week later, I went to go see this really like high level, old school psychiatrist, right? And that was the first proper psychiatrist I had been to. And he was, he's one of those like demons in disguise, right? He was one of those like, almost blessings in disguise as well. Like, I found myself in his office, in his lair, with all these pharmaceutical reps coming and going. Like they had all access VIP pass to the back offices. And when they finally brought me in for my appointment to his office, I sat there and I immediately didn't click with this old guy, man. This didn't click at all. I was like, I'm a really good read of character, and I didn't feel comfortable around the guy. So we bantered back and forth for probably 40 minutes or so. And he's like, well, son, you're going to need to tell me what's going on so I can help you. And I was like, well, I probably will, but this is our first visit. I'm sure we're going to be seeing each other more. Let me ease into this. Let's slow down here. Let me get to know you a little bit. And so, so we're sitting in his office, and I'm like, well, I'll tell you what, let me ask you a couple questions. He's like, okay, son, you can ask me whatever you want, right? So I look him straight now. I was like, how much money do you make? He's like, well, I make $450,000 a year. I drive a Mercedes-Benz S-Class or whatever. I got a Cessna 150, whatever airplane. I've got houses in Westlake Hills, Durango, Colorado, and Chiapas, Mexico. And you could just, his chest puffed up. He was full of pride. He was the man, what he was doing. He was the big pusher on the block, and he was making all the bank. And so I looked at the wall next to his desk, and it was filled with Vietnam War era memorabilia, right? So pictures and photos and little like, what do they call those? Models of airplanes and stuff. And I said, well, sir, it looks like you were in the Vietnam War. Is that true? Is that correct? He said, well, in the Vietnam War. He goes, I was a fighter bomber pilot. And I was like, oh, okay, fighter bomber. So I looked him dead in the eye, Max. I said, I said, well, tell me something, mister. Well, I won't say his name. I'm pretty sure he's deceased now, but I said, well, tell me something, Mr. Big Shot. How many people have you killed? And I swear to God, Max, this guy looked me right in the eye with these dead shark eyes. And he said, with the absolute, no hesitation, absolute conviction in himself, 100%, he goes, thousands, thousands. And he said it twice, kind of like Colonel Kurtz would do
So he's
from
a psychopath.
Apocalypse Now. He's a mass murderer. Yeah, he's literally somebody. I'm literally in the presence of somebody who has killed thousands of people, and it's okay talking about it. It's a sanctioned, approved mass murderer. So I'm like, holy smokes, okay, that was a big turning point for me. So we had a few minutes left in the appointment. He's like, well, I'll tell you what, we'll get you started here. We'll figure out more what's going on in the future. But I need to, I could tell you've got a chemical imbalance and you're going to need these medications. And all in all, he wrote me 7 different prescriptions to take every single day. I'm not even kidding. People think 7. People think I tell this story and they think I'm making it up, or I'm like, I've talked about this and people come at me and they're just like, no, you couldn't be. But it was literally, it was like Wellbutrin for this. It was Xanax for this. It was this to help me go to sleep when that didn't work. It was this antidepressant for this antipsychotic there, this to give me energy in the morning. It literally was 7 medications per day. And I was like, doctor, how long am I supposed to be taking this stuff? And he had it all figured out. It's science-backed pharmacology, right? Like he was like, well, this one you're going to take for another 2 weeks until you get off that other stuff. This one, we're going to up the dosage over the next 3 weeks until this one comes down. And over the next 6 weeks, you're going to get off this one because this one's going to level out this way. And he was dead serious. And he had free samples of all of it. And he packed them up in a little Christmas bag for me. And he sent me out of his office with a bag jingling full of sample pills. I have since learned that if you go down this road, if you allow yourself to go down this road, I've heard many, many stories since then of people seeking this kind of help from the professional establishment, the medical establishment, and ending up in these nightmare journeys that last years, where for periods of years, they're trying to figure out what medications like do what to these people. It's like they end up in these experimental, like never-ending experimental treatments with these doctors to find out, how they can regulate their mood the best way. And so they'll take lithium or something for whatever. That creates really dramatic side effects or really scary side effects. So they'll take them off, wean them off of that, and then put them on something else. But that affects this person differently. So it's just, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. So thank God at the time when I walked out of his office, spirit came down and spoke to me. I'll never forget, Max. I walked out of the office. I looked up at the sunny sky and I was like, this isn't what life is supposed to be like. This isn't what I signed up for. I was like, this is what they call help. And this guy literally wants me to be addicted to his drugs instead of the drugs that I already
That's what I was about to say. You're going to him for help getting off drugs. So you get more drugs?
More drugs.
And I'm trained in psychology, so, and I know how awful my field has been. And see, they're always medicating away the symptoms, but they don't go to the root of it, do they? They don't go to the root of the trauma that's causing the pain that's causing you to have to be addicted.
Not in psychiatry.
By the way,
not in psychiatry.
I took antidepressants in my 20s. I think it was Prozac. And after a little while, I went off it because, I didn't feel as depressed. I just didn't feel anything at all. I was just dead and numb.
Yeah, I had a conversation just a couple of days ago with one of my clients. I serve as a coach right now. I assist people in overcoming self-sabotage and developing emotional self-mastery and emotional sobriety. And we had a long talk about his feelings towards his sister, who's the same thing. She's been on antidepressants now for 10 years or something. And the way that he described it is she's never really happy. She's never really sad. She's the most present and unpresent person you'll ever meet, and that rings true for me. For the people that I know that have been on these, psychotropic medications for long periods of time, there's a vacancy in their soul and spirit. They say the window is the soul, the window, the eyes are the window to the soul. And you can really see it in these people, unfortunately, and it's sad, and again, like I said, after the research and the experience that I've had since, like the nightmare of trying to get these things out of your life, like they create such a dependence within people that it's almost, for so many people, like hope can be like completely lost. And I see that as one of the great tragedies of our time. But so I dumped the pills in the trash right there as I left his office. I was like, this is insane. Like I literally looked up and this voice spoke to me and it said, you are the one responsible for your health. and your happiness. You took these avenues, you took this route, you went to the professionals, and this is what they have to offer, and it's not what you need. And so I literally dumped the pills in the trash, never took any more psychiatric pills ever again.
Right.
But I was still left with the same condition I was in. And so I needed something, right? I needed a path, and I didn't have a path. I'd grown up with this chaotic energy in my life, this turmoil, this confusion, this fear, this constant chronic anxiety, and I didn't have a path forward. And because of that, I didn't have, my dad was never home. I didn't have the leadership in my house. I didn't have leadership in my life. And speaking about trauma, I know people experience this as well. But when I was 16, my grandfather passed away very suddenly in a very tragic, very scary way. And, he was like my father figure, but he was taken from me in a flash.
Yeah.
My other grandfather, who was like another father figure to me right at the same time, started having strokes and spent the next 7 years of his life, in that debilitated state where he can't even speak. So it's very frustrating and very sad. So all of the leadership that I had available to me was taken away from me or absent. So I didn't know. I didn't have any guidance. I didn't even know what it meant to like really think in terms of a proper career, to get in and fit in with the system. I didn't understand any of that. I was, looking back, I was lost. I was confused. And, drugs and alcohol were there to soothe that pain. And when they finally created more pain than they had soothed, I sought help. And fortunately for me, like I said, spirit spoke to me, and I still needed a path. And so I went back to work. At that time I was working in the video game industry, and I went back to work. And over the next week, I saw one of the other employees there. He would come and go in front of my office every day carrying Kung Fu weapons. I'm talking like broadswords, spears, long staffs, nunchucks, sais, which are like those pointy things that the Ninja Turtles use.
Yeah.
And finally I was like, hey man, like what's going on here? What are you up to? He's like, oh man, I practice Kung Fu down the street. You should come check it out. I was like, all right. So I stepped into the Kung Fu studio. And it took me 3 weeks of training, like 3 to 5 times a week. Like within 3 weeks, I was like, the depression was like much, much less severe. The anxiety was almost gone. And I was around a tribe of people who wanted to see me succeed. They wanted to see me push my limits. They wanted to see me be healthy. They wanted to see me be strong. And that changed everything. And so I went down the path of martial arts, and I've been a martial artist ever since, in various forms of martial arts. But that really saved my life.
That's amazing, Dylan. I just want to say, in terms of healing and recovering from trauma, there are 3 physical therapies that are the best: martial arts, dance, and yoga. And I myself, when I was going through my therapy to heal from the abuse that I went through, I took up kickboxing. Oh, nice. So not quite a martial art, but
I would say
that did for me the same thing. So wow, that's excellent.
You said martial arts, yoga, and dance. So that's really interesting, because dance was a big part of my life. When I graduated from high school, I got into the rave scene and I became a DJ. So I was a very active DJ for many, many years. That's where my wife and I got together, was in that scene. And so, we love to go dance, and we still to this day, we've been together for almost 30 years now. And that's the thing that we still love to do together, is we go out and we dance. And so, she became a yoga teacher many years ago, right about this time that I was going through my transition. And so yoga also ended up playing a really big part of my healing journey. I've done a lot of yoga, did the Ashtanga thing for a long time. But what I was going to say about the Kung Fu was, in the discipline of Kung Fu, the school of Kung Fu that I was in, they also offered Tai Chi, and they also offered, their variation of Qigong. So Qigong is something that a lot of people hear. It's it's a practice of cultivating your energy, right? Your Qi. So there can be a lot of subtlety, nuance, and esotericism to that, but the basic practice is breathing, visualization, and gentle movements of the body to create a flow state within your body and your energy. And so I started practicing some of that a couple of years deep into my Kung Fu journey. And that's when really things started really to shift. Like that's when the awakening energy really started to pour into my life, because for the first time in my life ever, I found myself really, really trying hard, Max, to sit down and be still, right? To stand in one place and be still.
Yeah.
At this point, I had been diagnosed with ADD. I had been, I'd been hooked on sodas and caffeine and junk food forever, like everybody was in the 80s and 90s. And I had never even, at that time, really, like meditation it wasn't even an American thing, really. I mean, it was, it was kind of a far out thing back then. And so we put into a class where it was like, stand here for 45 minutes with your eyes closed and breathe in this position was insanely difficult.
It
Or
is.
to be like, hey, we're in this Tai Chi practice, you're going to stand here in this form and you're going to move incredibly slow, like just to slow things down. And it took me probably 6 months of practicing Tai Chi. During that first 6 months, my mind would go crazy. It would go crazy. It was like, let me out of this cage. It was like a caged animal. And then I remember to this day, this one day I was in class and everything just shifted. Everything just slowed down. It was like finally the clutch set in or something and the gear dropped in my mind and everything just slowed down.
Yeah.
Slowed
Trauma
down.
makes us go way too fast. I have that problem too.
So yeah, man, people out there, like life is a journey of getting to know yourself and who you are, learning about what your nature is, right? Learning about what makes you tick and what makes you unique, learning how to use your assets to your advantage and in service of others, and
learning what's in your shadow.
learning what's in your shadow, and people have always told me that I'm high energy. They used to call me twitchy at work. They always call me ADD and this kind of stuff. And I've learned to really like embrace that side of me. Like there's a certain energy, but at the same time, it's like the energy is only valuable if it's in balance, if it's tempered, if it's understood and appropriated correctly. So now the shadow thing, that's a whole nother conversation, but that is a very interesting conversation, because from here, when I discovered Tai Chi and Qigong and really started to slow down my mind, that's when that, I think I refer to it as that awakening energy started coming into my life. And I'm sure what this is like. Like all of a sudden you start seeing the angel numbers everywhere. You start seeing the 222s, the 1111s, right? And at first it creeps you out. You're like, what the hell is going on here? Like what's happening? Like who's talking to me from beyond the veil, right? Like what's going on? And other synchronicities happen as well. Like you'll be, walking by somebody and they'll have a book and the book will just jump out at you. And you're like, I have to read that. I don't know why. And you'll read it. And the message of the book is exactly what you needed to hear.
Yep. Yeah.
Or you'll be somewhere and you'll be somewhere with a friend and they'll just randomly go, oh, hey, there's this guy that I know, Joe, you should meet Joe. And then that person ends up becoming like the most important teacher that you've had in your life up to that point.
Yeah.
So really the Qigong work, the Tai Chi work really sort of opened up that channel, that conduit to spirit, I feel like is what it was. And so that I really started to just receive from the universe the messages that I needed, that really to help me to blast through the misconceptions I had about the world and what was possible for me, and so a part of that was a political awakening. Okay. So a part of that is, well, I just figured out personally that the world isn't what I thought it was, because when I sit in meditation, I experience these esoteric metaphysical things that my doctor will tell you don't exist, but I can find hundreds of books about when I go look up, Tai Chi or acupuncture or something in the library. So there's this a disconnect between these two worlds, right? So there's the Western sort of the materialist mindset and the whatever else is out there. And so I started to be open to those possibilities. And at the same time, I started to recognize that not only was the material world not, this version of the material world was beginning to feel somewhat incomplete to me, but also the version of political events. Like it didn't match what I was seeing in the day-to-day world, the things that I was seeing going on the world stage. And I started to question what was going on behind the scenes. That's a whole nother big conversation, but this is probably 2003. Yeah, I remember 2003 when we began the invasion of Iraq. That's when I really was first starting to question whether or not that was the right thing to do, whether or not a foreign policy course of action such as that was really in the best interest of, American freedom or even the people of Iraq. And so that's what really woke me up. Of course, that was after 9/11. So I started to look at 9/11, and then I was one of those people back in the early 2000s, 2005, 2006. I was very involved in that whole movement of trying to wake people up. So we used to copy DVDs by the hundreds and take out DVDs, the 9/11 DVDs on depleted uranium. Aaron Russo did the movie From Freedom to Fascism, these sorts of things. There was a lot of information just starting to break into public consciousness at that time, and I was a part of that. And that's when also Ron Paul was running for the nomination for the Republican Party for presidential candidate. So I got involved with that at the local level. And that gave me a really clear insight into how politics works. And I figured out really, really quickly that American politics wasn't the arena that I needed to be playing in. So I dabbled in that. I became a delegate. I did the precinct conventions. I did all that kind of stuff because I wanted to change the world. I was becoming very idealistic, and I saw the corruption at the local level and everything. And I just really was like, yeah, this is not for me. We'll let other people play in that arena. And so eventually what happened was, sort of on a whim, my wife and I decided to move to Costa Rica. And we decided in 2009. And 6 months later, after we decided, we packed up our 2 kids, and we had 2 kids, 5 duffel bags, and we showed up in Costa Rica. We were originally planning to stay there for a year. But all in all, we ended up staying there for 7 years. So right after I got there, I got an email from a guy that I had met, and he said that he was thinking about coming down to Costa Rica for an ayahuasca retreat. I had never heard of ayahuasca at that time. Never heard of it. It sounded, in the way that he described it, it sounded like one of those things that you could only do if you were like a National Geographic anthropologist. Or, you know what I mean? It sounded like something that was so far away and off limits to the ordinary person that I just disregarded. I was like, whatever. But it planted a seed in my mind. And I was curious, seed of curiosity, right? And so over the next few months, that seed sort of grew and grew, and I finally contacted him. I was like, "Man, is this something that you can do? I would like to check into this." And so he sent me contact information, and I had a conversation with a person who was organizing this retreat in Costa Rica. And I didn't know much about it, but I knew that I had to go. So I shelled out the money. I told my wife and kids I'll be back in 12 days or whatever it was, And they were like, "Well, you're going away for almost 2 weeks." I'm like, "Got to do this. I don't know what it is." And went down deep into the jungle of Costa Rica, and ended up in ceremony with some proper traditional elders from the upper Amazon. So if anybody out there is familiar with, some of the medicine traditions, this would be the Sequoia, right? The Sequoia, their tradition is one of the oldest non-syncretic traditions of yahe drinking that there is left in the world. And so when I say non-syncretic, I mean it's not mixed with Christianity. You're not going to find like those. You're not going to find crucifixes or Mother Mary candles or any of this kind of stuff. There isn't going to be any singing in Spanish. There isn't going to be any instruments being played. There isn't going to be, it's not going to be westernized or colonized in any way. And so
you had the experience in its native setting, as did I. I was in the Peruvian Amazon, same thing. They spoke in Quechua, which when I drank ayahuasca, I actually understood.
For sure. Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead. That's really interesting that you found that medicine, because, these kinds of medicines can break apart our restricted consciousness, right?
Right. It's interesting when you said that, I almost feel like the medicine found me.
Yeah.
Like I didn't ask for it. I wasn't seeking it. And I know by comparison that a lot of people, they hear about it online. They hear about it in movies and TVs. They see articles. They hear people talking about it, raving about it this day. I mean, heck, even there was an NFL player, Aaron Rodgers, I think, who it was just recently. It was like major mainstream news. The mainstream news are amazed by the fact that this NFL player would do something as crazy as drinking this crazy witch's brew from the jungle, right?
Something natural made from plants that's been made for thousands of years. It's okay to pop a pharmaceutical.
It's okay to pop a pharmaceutical
that are so addictive that you have to taper down from them.
Yeah, and so people hear about it, and like under the surface, Max, like we're all really quite the same in a lot of ways, and we're all suffering from the same malaise in a lot of ways. Like we all have a lot of the same we have the same pressure on us, the same economic pressure, the same global pressure nowadays, which is just ratcheting up and up and up. Like we're all like living in this construct. The movie The Matrix is a great metaphor for really what life in contemporary America is like. It's very much very orchestrated. You can go this way, but don't go this way. You can look this way, but don't look this way. These are the options that you have, but if you exercise these options, you will pay the price. I mean, it's a the metaphor of the rat cage, the maze, right? The rat race, like the hamster wheel, like it's all right there. So people are feeling these things, and the effects of that, so commonly manifest as what we're calling mental disease, or we're calling, mental problems, right? There's was it the DSM-5? They've had hundreds of mental illnesses, which they've defined. And really what they are is they're just our natural reaction to being, pushed into unnatural living conditions, right?
Correct.
And so it shows up as depression. Like the one I see the most often with my clients is anxiety. I mean, that is the indicator of everything. That is like the number one thing that I think people want out of their lives. They may not be able to articulate it in that way. They may not recognize it on the surface. They may think, oh, well, I need a purpose, or, oh, I need to feel more expressive or whatever. But underneath it all, if you can help them to let go, to release the anxiety, then all the other problems, all the other questions about life tend to solve themselves, or they tend to be like their options tend to be visible finally, if that makes sense. And so depression, anxiety, whatever, that whole basket of problems that we get from being in this environment. And so a lot of people are suffering from that. So when they see ayahuasca, when they hear these stories about ayahuasca, they're like, I got to go do this. I want to go do this. I want to be healed. And so since that first time that I did it, I've participated in many, many journeys. I've been undergoing training with the Sequoia and with my teacher for many, many years. The last time I was able to go down and drink was in July, just a few months ago.
Oh, wow.
That's a whole nother story. Sometimes these random things call you and force you to be in the situations that you're supposed to be in, even though you didn't think you would be in. But I ended up having the opportunity to drink. But in 2012, I also was called by the plant medicine Iboga, and I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's a traditional shamanic medicine from Africa, from equatorial Africa. So it's really kind of interesting when you look at it from the Western point of view. You have this transformational medicine, which is really like geographically centered around the equator of the Amazon, right? The dense rainforest, right? So you take a couple of plants out of, hundreds of thousands of plants, and you mix them together, and you come up with this incredibly potent spiritual tool, for the spiritual healing tool.
Yeah.
Well, if you cross continents and go over to Africa, it's the same way.
Yep.
In the rainforest of Africa, there's a little shrub that grows over there called Tabernacle iboga. And so they figured out a long time ago that if you eat the inner root bark of this plant, it has a very similar effect in that it induces a spiritual and theogenic journey that helps you to navigate the complexities of life, right? It helps you to understand what life is and how to make it through life. And so in 2012, I was, after resisting that for a while, like it kept coming into my consciousness and I kept pushing it out, but then it just kept pushing into my consciousness. And then I had the opportunity to actually sit with that medicine, and wow, that Iboga itself is, it's an incredible tool. It's an incredible medicine. I just can't say enough amazing things about it. When I talk about it, a lot of times it seems that people have a misunderstanding about it. They've heard that it's dangerous or scary. And, there's a lot to be gained from this medicine if you're called to it. But so that became a part of my life in 2012. And so for the last, I guess it's been about 10 years, I've been helping to facilitate ceremonies with that medicine, working with a couple of centers in Costa Rica. I was just down there visiting my friend at Iboga Wellness, the center that he's created down there. It's absolutely beautiful. And so I got to reconnect with that. And so the plant medicines have been a really important part of my journey of healing. And what I mean when I say that, Max, is that I didn't understand when I stepped into those arenas, like what I still needed to do to heal. So now that I work with people as a coach, I can see what people are going through, and I see how helpful these medicines were for me to break through, like you said, this sort of contemporary layer of consciousness, to help me see what was possible, to help me see through the veil, to help me awaken to that sense of mystery, that sense of wonder, so that I can be inspired to actually make something of myself, to actually make myself of service in this life and be a good person, be of value to myself, my family, my community, and this world, and this is really the potential that these medicines have. And so, yeah, so, present day, like I keep myself clean. I don't drink alcohol. I don't do any of these other substances. I really help people to overcome self-sabotage. And there's a lot of forms of chemical self-sabotage that I help people understand. And so all in all, my healing journey is still going on to this day. And I think that's the point that I want to make. I'm still healing
Is it
myself.
ever really over for any of us? I don't think so.
I don't
I
think
wanted
so.
to say with all tribal cultures all over the world had some kind of plant medicine, whether it's iboga or ayahuasca or psilocybin or peyote, and they used it for healing and connection to the spirit world.
Right.
But then in our modern Western culture, the kinds of substances that we're given actually do the opposite. They really narrow and restrict our consciousness. And I don't know if you've ever heard this, but with alcohol, they call it spirits, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It'll tear holes in your energy field and allow demonic entities to come in, which is why sometimes you can black out and then not remember anything you did. Well, that wasn't you at that time, right? So I just thought I'd throw that in there. So we're encouraged, and pharmaceuticals, psychopharmaceuticals lead to all kinds of bad things, including suicidal ideation, right? So the Western medical model, what they do is the exact inverse and opposite of what these plant medicines will do to us.
Yeah, but what you're talking about isn't even the medical model. You're talking about the drugs that are pushed on society as a whole. I mean, alcohol is not really, it used to actually be part of the medical model, but it's not anymore really, although, all the cough syrups and stuff at the store, they all have alcohol in them. But regarding spirits, if you talk about like people being taken over by demonic spirits, a lot of people think you're nuts or woo or this and that, but everybody's seen it. Everybody has a partner or an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever, that used to just lose their minds.
Yeah.
When they drank. Yeah, it happens in ordinary life. And so the thing is, though, is that it's, and here's what I find. This is what I find very helpful for people that I serve. There's a lot of different coaches, a lot of different guides and advisors out there. Everybody uses their own unique experience, wisdom, and insight to help those who resonate with that, to help those who help them. And what I found with publishing at Waking Times for over, I guess we're like 11 something years now, is that, to say it like this, like back right before 2012, there was all this energy about the Mayan calendar, about the shift in human consciousness, about where things were going. And there was a lot of interest. People were just waking up to the internet. They just all of a sudden had access to pretty much the whole body of human knowledge. All the different esoteric spiritual practices were at their fingertips. Concepts like sacred geometry were coming into play. Shamanism, people didn't understand shamanism at all. People had nothing to compare Western psychiatric modalities to. And so shamanism came on. They're like, oh, hey, wait a minute. Like there are other possibilities here. And so in the world that we live in today, it's one of those things where a lot of that energy, that awakening energy was kind of like siphoned off after 2012, and it's kind of been like steered away. And so where I feel like things went very new agey almost. They went very like the term I would always get emails saying your site sucks because you're woo woo, right? That was the thing, woo woo, woo woo. But I think a lot of people are interested. A lot of people experimented with a lot of those things, and what I find today, what works for my clients, what works for me is very grounded, very practical, very understandable approaches to self-improvement, to self-development. So when you talk about the things that are pushed on society, alcohol is absolutely one of the most self-destructive, most destructive things that is pushed onto society, and it's everywhere. But beyond that, there's other things as well. One thing I help people to understand is the effect that caffeine really has on the brain. The effect that the things that caffeine really do to take you further and further away from your potential. And people don't understand this. They've never heard this stuff. But caffeine is the most used psychoactive drug on the planet. And it is like, some 90% of people, at least in America, 90% of people consume caffeine every day. If you're a food manufacturer or a beverage manufacturer and you can figure out a new way to wiggle caffeine into your product, boom, it's gold, right? Like, it's an addictive substance, but it's something that we've been trained to depend on. Like not just in the chemical addictive, it's trained, like it's a part of our society. It's like, you can go online right now and look at, the ridiculous coffee cups, and you'll find like the most ridiculous things that people say. They have a coffee cup that says, yeah, don't talk to me until I've had my coffee, or,
Right.
should I kill you or drink coffee? Better drink coffee, or I'm having my poop juice now. There's a whole culture around it. There's a whole cult of it now, and people don't
I,
understand.
I've never heard it referred to, as you just did, as a psychoactive
Yeah.
substance. So tell us, what do you know about caffeine? What are the detrimental effects of it?
Well, I mean, if you look at, like, I often refer people to a book called Caffeine Blues. It's one of those. It's one of those books. I have it sitting right here. I could look at the author's name again, but it's one of those books that, a lot of people say, "Oh, that book is hocus pocus, conspiracy information," right?
Hmm.
But just the short version of it is, caffeine is produced by speaking specifically about coffee for a second. Coffee produces caffeine. So the coffee plant produces caffeine as a pesticide. So the caffeine in the actual plant is a pesticide. It keeps, pests from eating the fruit of the plant. It keeps pests from eating the plant, so the plant can actually proliferate and grow.
Uh-huh.
So we take that pesticide that the plant naturally produces, and we cook it, grind it up, and drink it in ourselves and call it good for us. But as soon as it hits you, like, it has the effects of a poison on your body. That's why people feel like that need to evacuate. That's why it's like, this is my poop juice. I know it sounds silly saying that over and over again, but you have adults running around, advertising their addiction to a substance that is causing them harm, and they don't even realize it. So here's where the self-sabotage comes into play, and here's where I think people can really benefit, right? So what caffeine does to your body, right, is it causes the adrenals to overactivate and to produce adrenaline, to produce cortisol, to produce these stress hormones, because it thinks that the body's under attack. It thinks that the nervous system is under attack. So if you look at that from just a thinking standpoint, a mind standpoint, the mind has a couple of different modes that it thinks in. And one of the modes that we know a lot about is called fight or flight mode. It's often referred to as fight or flight mode. So you're activated, your nervous system is activated in a particular response that changes the way that your brain functions. It actually shifts the mode of thinking from your brain. So if you look at, there's a thing called the triune model of the brain that explains what they call the three areas of the brain. They have the reptilian brain, which is in the lower cortex down here, and that supposedly is the seat of your most instinctual, basic survival type behavior, right? Then you have the middle brain, the mammalian brain, which is associated with emotional based thinking, which is associated with your need to fit into groups, with your need to fit into social norms. And then you have your higher levels of thinking, your prefrontal cortex, your frontal lobe, which they call the human brain, right? And this is where, like, your ability to analyze, your ability to reason, your ability to apply logic to life really rests. And so, just like in hypnosis, just like with brainwaves, if the brain is operating in a beta mode, like, that's your highest level of thinking. That's where you're using your reason, logic. You're analyzing science, books, these and that, and you're able to make good, sound decisions. That's where, like, all of the good things come from, I like to say. Below that is alpha. So alpha is more of it's more of a restive state. So if you know anything about hypnosis,
Yeah.
like a hypnotist, like, the first thing they do is they use the techniques. They draw on the gaze of your eye. They use repetitive suggestions to drop your brain down into alpha mode, because that is the most suggestible state. And in that state, you're highly suggestible. Advertisers do this all the time.
That's the state we're in watching TV, right?
Yes, and there's a great documentary on that called Pseudology, which talks about the art of lying, which talks about, a lot of research has been shown that it takes 60 to 90 seconds for a person's brainwave to drop down into alpha wave, so they're highly suggestive, right?
Yep.
And so in these states, below that there's theta and delta. So there's other states that you experience while you're sleeping. But if you're in alpha state, you're very suggestible, right? So you're taking suggestion. So if somebody's watching TV and the flicker rate and the movement of the images on the screen and the droning sounds of the pundit while the text is scrolling out the bottom is causing your mind to overprocess information, so you slip down into alpha mode, then they could just tell you to go wear 3, 4, 6 masks, whatever it is, and you're like, that sounds great.
Yeah.
That's going to keep me safe, right? You turn into that kind of zombie. But caffeine does something similar. I mean, it shuts off your ability to think with that front part of your mind. It shuts off your ability to make long-term decisions, like sound, rational, smart decisions for yourself. The
That's
decisions that,
I have a quick question. That's
yeah,
interesting because from what I know about the brain, if the so-called reptilian brain, where we have fight or flight, is activated, that the prefrontal cortex actually shuts down.
exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. So
Okay.
I mean, you just verified what I'm saying is that when the nervous system is attacked like this with a toxic chemical like caffeine, if it's attacked, then the nervous system triggers exactly what you're talking about. It moves the level of thinking away from the prefrontal cortex, and in severe cases, like down even past the mammalian brain into the
Right.
actual like fight or flight mode. And so
Right.
that's why people are frantic at the everyday. That's why people need alcohol at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon to bring their nervous system back down, to regulate, to down regulate their nervous system. And it's a vicious cycle.
Interesting. I didn't know
So
that about caffeine, so that you taught me something new today. But as you're talking about it, it makes sense. And that same brain issue where the reptilian brain is activated is how they got everyone to believe that there was a pandemic, right? The media kept putting out fear, 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 fear. We're all going to die. Oh no, this boogeyman out there. And it shut down people's ability to think critically.
yeah, I mean, and fear is another drug that's being used against us to do
Yes.
exactly what you're talking about. So if you look at how if you take like the knowledge that advertisers have, how advertisers influence group psychology. I mean, this has been going on for around 100 or so years. I mean,
Yeah.
Edward Bernays was like the
Yep.
father of modern public relations or whatever, but he's the first one that said, "Hey, let's look at group psychology. Let's try to figure out how we can manipulate, how we can get a whole bunch of people to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do. How can we get a whole bunch of people to do something that isn't organic to them?" So he had things like, there's a campaign called Torches of Freedom. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but smoking was just becoming popular for men, and they wanted to figure out if they could. It really was an experiment just to see if they could influence people. But the side benefit of the experiment was that it got, the other half of the population hooked on cigarettes. So what they did was they ran this campaign called Torches of Freedom. Anybody can look it up on YouTube. It's really fascinating. But they had these like, modern pretty women out there, and they were smoking, and they were saying things like, "Well, I'm free. I'm awesome. I'm an independent woman. And I'm smoking too. I'm lighting up too. I'm lighting up too." So they created the image, the perception, right? They created that almost like that celebrity worship. That was some of the first experiments into that. And lo and behold, like women out there, they identified it. They wanted to be part of that. They wanted to, that need to be part of that powerful group was like, okay, and had them run down to the store and start smoking. But so the thing is, like with self-sabotage, I mean, there's with self-sabotage and caffeine, it's like people don't, it's really difficult for people to turn against their sacred cows. It's really difficult for people to acknowledge when they might have been misled. And so when you try to explain to somebody that caffeine is actually like contributing to your self-sabotage, it's hard for them to know. But if you can get somebody off of caffeine for even just a few weeks, and it really takes that long for the mind to start really return to its normal functioning, then what they find is that like everything that they thought they were getting out of caffeine, they weren't. It's a lie. Like they thought they were getting focus, energy, and concentration. What they were really getting was this distracted quality. I'm all over the place. They were getting crashes in the afternoon, and so they kept just applying more and more caffeine just to get through the day. But what you find out when you kick caffeine is that your thinking clears up, your digestive system improves, you become much more calm, you handle situations much better. You're nicer to your kids, right? You don't fly off the handle. One thing that I find that's interesting with it is you don't crave other things, like your cravings for sugar, your cravings for alcohol, your cravings for whatever nicotine or whatever it is, they subside as well when you get caffeine out of your system. So I'm kind of starting to think of caffeine as the gateway drug to everything else. But so what happens is when you get that out of your system, the functioning of the mind lifts, it elevates, and you can feel this. I mean, you can see this happening in real time over the first few days, over the first week. I mean, a lot of people have headaches, a lot of people have withdrawal symptoms. But once you get beyond that, you can actually feel yourself concentrating in a way that you perhaps have never experienced in your life. So for anybody out there that's listening, I mean, give yourself a few weeks off caffeine if you can do it. And just be real honest with yourself about the benefits that you feel. I mean, the benefits even go on. I mean, like clearer skin, the ability to lose weight, because a lot of the weight that people hold on to isn't because of a diet or lack of exercise. A lot of it is just because stress.
Yeah.
I mean, having coffee all day, every day is
it causes inflammation.
Inflammation. It causes, the constant release of cortisol and the other stress hormones. And so you're always in that state of stress. And to be out of that state of stress for the first time in your life, it's like a breath of fresh air. Like your creativity comes back, your ability to concentrate on one thing and not feel like multitasking is the way to go. Like that comes back online. And it really is a powerful experience for people. And so when I say it's self-sabotage, what I mean by that is that when I say it contributes to self-sabotage, what I mean is that it pushes your mind out of frontal lobe thinking.
Right.
It pushes you into that emotional reactionary level of thinking, or even lower than that, the survival instinctual level of thinking, right?
And I would say that level of thinking is the powers that be that run this planet. That is the kind of level of thinking that they want us all to be in, so that we'll be easily controlled and manipulated, right? And so caffeine's probably just one thing. It's everything out there that we eat, every psychopharmaceutical, the media. We grow up, I like to analyze words. I speak several languages just from growing up. And so culture, cult. We're all raised in a cult. Right. And this cult drills all of these substances or ideas, or, the educational system itself does that to us, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And what I wanted to say about Edward Bernays and the advertisers is that they know.
They know. No. Do you know that the Tavistock Institute was created to do this, this to our brains? Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. and what they know, the open secret in our world, is that they know how to bypass what they call the critical factor of your mind. So a hypnotist knows this. They understand the mind as to have two major components: the conscious component and the unconscious component. Mm-hmm. And of course, you may have seen the iceberg, diagram. Like, it is said that the 93 to 97% of human behavior is unconscious, right? It originates within the subconscious mind. So if you look, like it's like somebody who's really adept at what they do, really skilled and successful at what they do. I don't know, a ball player, Tom Brady, right? Whatever. Like his subconscious mind is programmed in such a way that he easily and effortlessly is always pushing himself to be his best, right? But the average person, the programs running in their subconscious mind are always pushing and shoving them towards being their worst.
Right.
Okay. And so the hypnotists know that in order to bypass the critical factor of the mind, what they know is that if they want to implant a suggestion into you, if they want you to believe that you're a chicken, right?
Yeah.
If they want you to draw a picture of a sun on a paper thinking that it was original to you, they know what to do. And what they do is they implant what are called pillars of belief into your subconscious mind, so that your subconscious mind believes something to be true, whether it may or may not be true. This is why a stage hypnotist can get somebody to completely forget or misname themselves. Like you can see these over and over again. This person forgets their own name after after the influence of a hypnotist. But so they know that, like, in order to plant those pillars of belief in your subconscious mind, they have to bypass the critical factor, which is what we're talking about here with the frontal lobe, the front part of the brain, right? The higher analytical thinking portion of your mind, the part of you that goes, wait a minute, is that really good for me? And in order to do that, the way to break through the critical factor of the mind is to use what they call high emotion. Everybody knows this. The two emotions that they use over and over and over again on television and in propaganda: fear and sex. Like fear and sex. I mean, that's why they have these, like busty blondes slanging cheeseburgers. You know what I mean? Like it's in your face. It is an open secret. So they appeal to your high emotions. When you start to experience that emotional takeover, which is a transfer of your thoughts from your rational mind to your emotional mind, then you're susceptible. Then you'll believe that the cheeseburger is going to make your life better. Then you'll believe that the Happy Meal or the basket of fries is going to get you closer to owning that
or the
Ferrari,
COVID injection
or
will
the
somehow
COVID injection is going to save
protect
your
you.
life.
Right.
Right. And so it's really been an interesting few years. I mean, seeing all this on display because, so many, intelligent people have pointed out there's a mass psychosis going on.
Yes.
And if you understand how the mind works, if you understand how these processes are, I mean, for example, Max, I went to the University of Texas to get my college degree many, many years ago. I took some classes in marketing and advertising, and they tell you straight up in the advertising class, like there's this thing called subliminal messaging. We use it all the time. We've gotten in trouble for using it too much in these ways, so we use it subtly in these ways. So they use imagery, they use like images that come and go really quickly. They use suggestive settings, suggestive positions, suggestive camera work. So they use all these things. So what we're talking about here is subliminal programming of the mind to get you to make decisions which wouldn't really make sense to your logical, rational mind. And so as a self-sabotage coach, that's really like the basis for helping people to evolve out of self-sabotage, is understanding how your mind is influenced. Because the good news is that when you understand this, you also understand how easy it is to use this stuff for yourself. So the mind is one of the most researched things, scientifically researched things ever, right? Like we know an awful lot about the human mind, but a lot of this stuff just sits in the employ of corporations and advertisers and propagandists.
Those who would like to use it against us. And I would just throw in there with, I've seen this mass formation thing out there. The piece that I think we need to add on to that is trauma. Trauma has been deliberately used collectively. Wars, scarcity, famine, all these things have been deliberately created because those people that created psychiatry and psychology and the Tavistock Institute, they understand that trauma fragments us and puts us in that state where then what you're talking about can easily happen.
Yeah. And so, if you talk like, as I do, like I talk with a lot of people on the level of as a coach and an advisor, right? And so a lot of people are starting to wake up to this understanding that they're affected by their childhood trauma.
Yes.
They know that the things that happened to them, they're when they were young, the things that they were exposed to and they shouldn't have been exposed to, have left imprints on them. And a lot of adults are really trying to unravel that. And what trauma does is it, when it happens, like the emotional state that you feel around it is sort of like frozen into your system. And so like the physiological presence of that emotion, that experience, is right at your fingertips for your whole life.
I use the image of like when you brand a cow, right? The trauma memory it's right there. Right. And it doesn't get processed by the brain and unpacked. So therefore, it's like, let's say the trauma is a bruise. If I have a bruise here, I'm fine until someone brushes up against it, and then I'm going to react. Right. And so we become super reactive. We can't choose our actions anymore because of the way those traumatic memories are imprinted. So you're exactly right.
Yeah, and so I will say that you said you can't choose, and here's where I think that the conversation needs to go, because I believe that you do have a choice. Okay. So a lot of people, what happens, and this is like the work, when I say that I work with people on the level of emotional self-mastery, emotional sobriety, what I'm really trying to help them understand is that they're addicted. A lot of people, when they hear the term addiction, Max, they think of addiction to alcohol, drugs, pills, whatever, right? The underlying addiction that fuels all of that, the way I see it, is the addiction to a set of feelings, the addiction to sets of emotions. Okay. So if you were imprinted with this trauma when you were very young or an age, it left an impact on you. So when I look back now from the perspective I live in now, I can see that the ongoing emotional reality that I lived in was one of anxiety. It was one of fear. It was one of, those passive aggressiveness. You never knew. Walking on eggshells. You never knew if you were going to get in trouble. You never knew if you were going to be praised. Like it was a crapshoot every single day. So living on edge. Okay. So I grew up not understanding that. And so I tried everything under the sun to get me off of that edge. Right. And so I even drank heavily until not even that many years ago before I finally recognized that that poison had to go from my life, And so it gets to a point though, where the talk about trauma and trauma release and healing the trauma and stuff, it really all comes down to this. From my perspective in the work that I see with clients, it comes down to recognizing that you're being driven around by a set of feelings. The trauma imprint left you with a very firm set of feelings. And so, like, for example, when I have a client, I have clients that are in their 40s, 50s, even up to their late 70s. And I'm like, well, okay, so you feel that experience of anxiety, fear, and overwhelm in your life right now. Okay. And when you think about that, when you intellectualize that experience at this stage in your life, you see it as around the COVID drama. You see it as around the economic drama, whatever. Okay, cool. Put that aside for 1 second. What is the feeling that you have in your body? Okay, hold on to the presence and the awareness of that feeling and back up 5 years. Was the feeling there? Yes. Okay. What were the circumstances then? What was causing you anxiety? Now, well, back then it was because I was in a traumatic relationship, or I was breaking up with this, or I was moving out so-and-so and this. I was like, okay, cool. But the feeling was the same, but the circumstances were different. Go back 10 years. The feeling was there, but the circumstances, the turmoil was still there. The people were different. The actors, the characters, the situations, the scenery, the locations, everything, the set of the stage was different, but the script was the same. Usually when we do this, we can go all the way back to when they were young, and they're like, this feeling goes all the way back to that first time that, so-and-so did this to me. Mama said this to me. So-and-so, you know what I mean? Like it goes all the way back. And so I help people to see how the real addiction is in subconsciously or unconsciously recreating circumstances which trigger this emotional experience because that's what they're used to.
Yes.
This subconscious mind has you doing things. So for a lot of people, Max, and speaking for myself even as well, like the emotional cocktail, the set of feelings that I was addicted to for most of my life that caused so much derailment, chaos, and dysfunction in my life, the emotional cocktail was about instability, uncertainty, insecurity. Okay. So when I can go back over the last 40 something years, I can say, okay, cool. Here's what I did at this stage in my life to recreate instability, to recreate insecurity, to recreate uncertainty. So when I was young, it was drinking alcohol, doing meth, all these things, dumping all of that chemical chaos into my body. And that created the instability of a drug addict, right? And then I kicked that stuff out of my life. And then it was career problems, perhaps, right? I somehow manifested situations where the career wasn't whatever. And then it was money drama, got myself into debt, whatever, and then, later stages of that, it was, then I was, drinking too much or like not eating healthy or taking care of my body. So it's another way to recreate that instability, uncertainty, and insecurity in my life. And so it goes down to the very subtle levels. And where it ultimately ends up, I think, for someone like myself, it really ends up in my relationship, right? In my marriage. I can see how, like, the emotional patterns of the past, I keep unconsciously recreating those in order to create drama and chaos in my relationship so that I end up feeling insecure. So a big one for a lot of people, though, is procrastination, avoidance, getting ready to get ready, not taking action on the things that they know they need to take action on, because not doing that, procrastinating on the important things, looking the other way, and letting your mail stack up and never checking letting your taxes go unpaid for years and years and years. These are the subconscious mind's way of saying, hey, you're not doing the drugs anymore, you're not doing this, you're kind of living okay. Let's go ahead and make sure that you have that instability by not actually moving forward with your life. So once someone really has the awakening to the recognition that there can be an addiction to a set of feelings and emotions, then you can look at it like that way. Then there's actually something to let go of. There's no longer something that needs to be resolved or healed or come to terms with. You can just let it go, because people can People can understand that when I want to give up alcohol, I just let go of the bottle. I don't physically pick it up. I don't drink from the bottle. I don't put that stuff into my body. But when you're dealing with like emotional sobriety, it's difficult for people at first to understand that if it's really the same thing. You let go of the sets of feelings. So when you say it's not a choice, I say it is a choice. And so a lot of this particular
I'm
philosophy.
saying it isn't a choice until you can take control of that. And then we have a choice. And we gravitate towards what's familiar, right? So we gravitate towards what's familiar, and it is subconscious. And until we deal with what's in there, the classic thing is the woman who gets into an abusive relationship
Over and over again. Yeah.
And, she grew up with an abusive dad. So it's not that she wants to have an abusive husband, but it's familiar. And because it's subconscious, she will be drawn to that same pattern until she can, like you said, it always goes back to the beginning, until she can deal with that original issue. The temptation or the addiction is to repeat it over and over, and myself, for example, what you're saying resonates. One day, a few years ago, I noticed that I always have some level of fear going on. And I live in a beautiful house full of windows. I see trees outside. And I noticed, oh my God, I can't be in this present moment and enjoy the space that I live in, because this fear that is constantly in me won't allow me to experience peace. But I have peace now. But internally, I'm in fear, right? So that's what you're talking about.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm talking about being dragged around by these. For a lot of people, it's chronic. It's very subtle, but it's present. It's ever present. Fear, anxiety, overwhelm, self-doubt, uncertainty. And the way that I look at it is, let me just say this one thing about choice. I think that the most empowering, the most important way that somebody can approach this is to recognize that I have a choice to let go of this stuff. Okay. And it's perhaps we can maybe take that conversation down that road in a moment. But what you're talking about is you're talking about the emotional interpretation, the emotional representation of the states of consciousness we operate at. Okay, and this is something that the work that I do with a lot of people is very linked to the work that David Hawkins does. Perhaps you're familiar with him. He wrote a book called Letting Go, Power versus Force, Transcending Levels of Consciousness. But of all the hundreds of personal development books I've read and all the amazing things that I've done to try to heal myself and be high-minded and stuff, like that's some of the most practical, useful information that there is. What he does is he looks at conscious levels of consciousness and measures them, relates them to the emotional state that you're in. So here at the top of the highest levels of consciousness is enlightenment, love, joy, peace. There's really high-minded things. The mother, think of the Buddha, right? Think of Amma, right? Amma's out there giving hugs from that place, right? And but down at the very bottom, you have a whole set of emotions which represent lower levels of consciousness. Okay, so these are shame, guilt, anger, anxiety, fear, some levels of pride, some levels of desire, right? And all of these things sit in the lower states of consciousness. But this is what even the most awake, most educated, most researched people, this is where they spend most of their time at. And this is why so many people feel stuck. They feel like they don't have a purpose, right? Because in those levels of consciousness, as Hawkins points out, as he demonstrates, these are what he describes as contractive states of consciousness. Yes. Okay, so life feels small, like it feels like things are closing in on you. Opportunities, they just don't seem to exist. You just can't catch a break, right? But above that, into the higher levels of consciousness, there's things like acceptance, willingness, neutrality, peace, right? These are the things that are representative of expansive states of consciousness. So if you can learn to look at it this way, then it's easier for you to recognize, oh, okay, this fear is what's making my life feel small. And so the thing about it is that between the contractive and the expansive states of consciousness, there's this quality called courage. Okay.
Yeah.
So courage really is like the turning point. It really is the quality. I'm not even sure that it's an emotion itself, but it really is the quality that allows you to reach for the higher states of consciousness. And when you do, you'll find that they are accessible to you. And if you look at this as a skill of letting go of lower states of consciousness, then you find that, and if you look at it as a skill and you practice it as a skill, I have one of my clients who is in her 40s and she's just now learning to drive a car for the first time. She's just about to get a driver's license for the first time, and she's learning on a stick shift, right? So the first time she sat in the car to drive it, she was overwhelmed. It seemed impossible. She was like, I don't have 3 legs for these 3 pedals, like, what am I supposed to do, right? And over a short period of time and a lot of practice, she was able to master driving a stick shift. So now she's about to get her driver's license. But it's easy for someone to see that as a skill that you can master. So what I help teach people as a coach is I help them to understand that there is an emotional skill that you can master, which will serve your life in profound ways. Profound ways. It'll open up incredible possibilities, synchronicities, experiences, connections to you, because it'll keep you in expansive states of consciousness. It'll give you the courage to let go of conflict, in your relationships, to let go of conflict in your place of employment, right? To let go of conflict within yourself. It'll give you the courage to let go of shaming yourself for not being perfect. It'll give you the courage to release anxiety, like actually let go of anxiety and let go of the fear and see what's up above and beyond that. And so that's one of the, I think, the things. It's very grounded. It's very easy for people to understand once you practice it a little bit. But there is a skill to be learned of letting go of these lower states of consciousness so that you can allow yourself to see beyond the bars of the cage that you've created within your own mind. And you can allow yourself to actually see where your sense of purpose may be, where your path may be.
Yeah.
And so,
Maslow, one of these psychologists, his hierarchy of needs, if you don't have those basic needs like food and shelter and all that met, I mean, there's a gradual rise in consciousness, and then we get to the point where we give back to the world, right? We create something beneficial out here, but you're right, we can't get there until we release that stuff. And for myself, one way that what's really helped me is I imagine like a little observer eye of myself, always watching myself. Mm-hmm. What am I thinking? What behavior did I just choose to do? Why? What's informing that, right? It really helps to be conscious of my consciousness. That's where
right.
I'll take something that is not great, and in that moment, I'll reframe it and I'll say, this is not the way, and I'm going to put something new in its place.
Yeah, and that's a skill. That's something that you practice. That's something that you can fall back on. It works for you, right? It probably didn't work as well the first time you tried it.
Well, it takes repetition. It's mm-hmm. like I work out 5 days a week, right? I do kickboxing, I do weight. I developed a bicep not in one curl, I had to go for weeks and months. It's repetition, it's practice. You're absolutely right. But we have to make that choice to do that.
Yeah, and I think that, well, I know, like, for the times that we're in, especially for truth seekers, it's really, really easy, Max, for truth seekers to get lost. To get lost. And
that negativity, right?
Yeah, and I've used the term spiritual warfare. I've used that term many times, and it's a cool term to use. I mean, it may be a little dramatic, but when I use the term spiritual war, I'm not talking about angels and demons and dark versus light necessarily. All that is certainly a part of it. What I'm talking about is like the effects that the world has on your spirit. So what's your spirit? Like, a lot of people talk about the mood that they're in. I was in a great mood today. I was feeling really good. I was in a bad mood today, right? Those are indicators of your spirit. So to take all of that really high-minded, almost like out of reach concepts and just bring it down to what's actually happening in your own life. Like, what kind of mood are you in?
Yeah.
And the reality is that most of the truth seekers that I know, like, all my clients are truth seekers. I haven't worked with a single person who's vaccinated, to be honest with you. Like, none of them are vaccinated. Like, those are the kind of people that I attract.
Yeah.
and they're wonderful, wonderful people, but they're up and down. They're up and down. They're up and down. Their moods are up and down. They're happy one day, depressed the next day. Excited one day, exhilarated the next day, and not so sure of themselves the next day. And they wake up angry or resentful the following day. It's this never-ending cycle of, why can't I be at peace? Why can't I be continually at peace? And so I look at that as signs of like losing, or perhaps like losing some battles in the spiritual war. How is your spirit? Is your spirit low? Is your mood low? Is your energy low? Do you have brain fog? Do you feel purposeless? Do you feel like, what's the point? Have you slipped so far? Have you slipped all the way down into apathy, which is one of the lowest levels of consciousness that you can be on? Like, what's the point of this? And the thing is, like, because what we're talking about here is we're talking about, in a sense, I call it emotional self-mastery, but it's a level of training that you don't receive anywhere. There's this conversation about emotional intelligence, and that's usually like reserved for people that we really revere for some reason. Oh, that person's really, really emotionally intelligent. These are often people that we look up to, and these are good-minded, good-hearted people. But we're talking about like basic everyday emotional intelligence so that you can master your level of emotion so that you can be in an even mood. Because what I see is that most of the people that are truth seekers, now many of the truth seekers that I know, they're also seeking their own truth. And it's a truth that they feel within themselves. They feel that they have a bigger purpose. They feel that they don't fit in. They feel that there's something they're supposed to be accomplishing in this life that isn't the task of the ordinary NPC out there, sitting in traffic for 3 hours a day, right? That isn't for them. And so it's a search for their own truth. And what stands in the way of that search is this constant pull down into these negative emotions. And so the training really is about learning to let go. Most people don't know it, but they tend to process negative emotions in only one of three ways. Well, they might use all three ways, but they tend to process negative emotions in three ways. Those are repression and suppression is one. Repression is the unconscious version. As a psychologist, this. These are the things that we forget. These are the things that a hypnotist might, work to uncover, the past abuses and these things, the things that were so traumatic that the conscious mind just put that in a lockbox, set it aside. It can't deal with it.
Still affects us, but yeah.
It still affects you, but you don't even know it.
Right.
But the flip side of that coin is the suppression. These are the things that affect you, and you push them down. This is that feeling. This is that when people say, yeah, I don't have time for this right now. I'm just going to push this down. Like, you know what? I'm going to keep going, keep pushing through. That's that. You know what? I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. You know what? I'm not going to get angry, right? Like, this is how people suppress the emotions that are naturally arising with themselves. Most people, though, and this is kind of a modern, contemporary cultural thing, is that we've been sort of led to believe that expression is the way to go. Expression can certainly have its benefit, the expression of emotions, especially if it's used in like positive ways, Max, like creative ways, like a musician expresses himself or an artist. Like those can be really therapeutic, cathartic ways of expressing negative emotions and allowing them to move beyond energetically, because what you're really talking about here is energy, right?
Or punching a punching bag.
Punching a punching bag. I do that all the time still.
I do that several days a week.
Literally, was last night. I was like, beat the living snot out of a 100-pound bag downstairs last night. Yeah. So, okay, cool. We're peas in the same pot. But the other way, and the way that most people do this, is by escape.
Yes.
And so, the bulk of society escapes through alcohol. That's the big one. Drown it away, alcohol, whatever other drugs, this and that. The other side of that is, escape through entertainment, television, Netflix. Oh, it's Netflix binge. How cool is it nowadays, Max, to just watch 63 episodes of the latest show people are always like, did you see this? Did you see this? And I'm like, how many hours of programming is that? It's literally like 120 episodes of 45 minutes a piece. Yeah. No, thanks. I don't have time for that.
Escape through food, escape through sex. There's a lot of avenues to escape.
But for truth seekers, though, a lot of truth seekers already know the damage that alcohol does. They already know that the damage, how stupid TV is. They already know these things. And so they tend to retreat into what a lot of them would think of as research, rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Spend a lot of time looking for answers, a lot of time searching for the truth, a lot of time like figuring out the latest detail, wanting to know the latest details of that. Like they don't understand that is a form of escapism. It's feeding that same addiction towards that emotional cocktail that they're really hoping to run from. Like, there's no amount of information. I've known this. There's no amount of information that's ever going to settle it once and for all. This is exactly what's happening. Bam, we can move on.
I think there's a fine line, right, between the truth is light. So we want to know the truth, otherwise we can't find solutions for stuff. But you're right. What you're saying is that can become its own addiction.
Absolutely.
And the truth is only worthwhile if once you learn it, you take it in and you change yourself and you do something about it.
Yeah, the truth shall set you free. And so a lot of truth seekers out there, they're not free. They're trapped. They're trapped. And so I've seen this over and over again with my clients, with my one-on-one clients, is that like they'll be doing great. They'll be doing great. And then I'll talk next week. And how was their week? It was a disaster. Why was it a disaster? Because I did the thing I said I wasn't going to. I said I was going to shut down media for a week and see how it felt. But instead, I was on all of these sites. I was reading about. I know a lot about this stuff, so I could go down these rabbit holes. I know you do too. But
yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's really terrifying stuff. Yeah, cool. Well, what good is it doing for you? And they may not be able to answer that, but it's easy for them to answer that. They can see the harm that it's doing to them. I mean, look at the emotional state that they're in. They're fear. They're absolutely afraid, deathly afraid sometimes, anxious, worried, chronically worried. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. And so, like I said, like most people deal with emotions in those three ways: repression, suppression, escape, or expression. And so a lot of times when people don't express things in a healthy way, they express them to their partners. Like, I just got to get this off my chest, or, their boss or whatever. And most people aren't skilled enough to do that in a way that doesn't create more conflict in their lives. And so the real magic here, the real magic that I'm getting at is that what most people haven't been taught, what most people don't see or understand, is that a fourth way to this is to let go. That's a process called letting go. And like I wonder if I have it's right up there on my shelf, but the book called Letting Go by David Hawkins. If you're out there, read that book, check it out. Read chapters 2 and 3, the mechanism of letting go and the anatomy of emotions, because it'll tell you everything that you need to know to navigate what's happening in our times. Because people like you are being called upon to live in higher consciousness right now, to set an example, to be firm, to be the rock, the stability that other people need to get through the times, right?
Yes.
There's the preppers out there doing their work. There's the people building bunkers out there doing their way of surviving this. But there's a whole cadre of people like you and I out there who are there to be like the spiritual, the emotional, provide the emotional stability, the path through this emotionally of what's going on and what's going to happen over the next few years.
Yes.
And so go ahead.
That's why I wanted to have you on and interview you today. Awesome. That's what I call my show Unbroken, right? Because we're all broken in some way, but you're an example of someone who unbroke yourself. You put yourself back together in a better way, and you're going out there. I mean, I love hearing about your coaching, and if you want, you can say how people might be able to reach you for that. But this is you giving back. You're helping. This is what we've both chosen to do, right? To use our experience. We've been through hell and back. I've been through all of that stuff too and more, right? Yeah. But here we are. We've done our work. We've put ourselves back together. Right. And we're here trying to help other people do the same.
Yeah, and it's not an easy path.
No, it's not, but
especially in the Matrix.
But yet, I think it's not an easy path, but I would rather do the hard work and be free internally than limp along my life, drugging myself so I don't feel the intensity of my pain. And then on my deathbed, realize I never lived a day of my life. I mean, no, I think this is a much better choice.
All in.
And we can be examples for people, right? So I think the higher we have developed ourselves and our level of consciousness, just being around somebody else, just in the same room, can affect the other person positively, right? Which is why during the COVID thing, they had people stand 6 feet apart, because the heart has a 6-foot radius around us. And if your heart is positive, it'll uplift someone just that alone, not to mention everything else that you and I both do.
Yeah, and science backs this up. And I want to thank you for the kind things that you said. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
How you get like, okay, so I work with people in a couple of different ways. And if you're interested at all, I'd love to speak with you. One of the things that I offer is free 15-minute, what I call insight calls. So if you've listened to this and you're curious at all, you can go to my website, dylancharlescoaching.com. So on that page, absolutely sign up for my newsletter there. It's called On the Path. I just talk about things that are relevant to me in the time, the experiences that we're having as we're going through this. I mean, there might be, I might send out something about shamanism. I might send out something about just some of the things I've been through. I might talk about some of the science of like what you're talking about, the energy, because even with the emotional stuff I'm talking about, you're dealing with energy. Like emotions are energy. So dylancharlescoaching.com. Sign up for my newsletter. You can also book a free 15-minute call. I love talking to people all over the world. It's a really joy. But if you're just curious of what kind of insight I could offer onto any challenges that you're facing, like we could wrap for 15 minutes, and it's always a joy to me. But that's definitely the place to start. Of course, I publish at Waking Times. I've really backed off like a whole lot on that project. I've spent a good solid 10 plus years putting my heart and soul into that, and we got with the environment of censorship and demonetization and shadow banning and all that kind of stuff, I got a little discouraged, and it really helped me to realize that I wanted to move in a different path, which is working with people one-on-one. So I had been accumulating a lot of experiences working with the plant medicines of Boga and ayahuasca, or yahe as we call it.
Yep.
And that really helped me to see that like what lights me up, what really like fires me up, is spending time with people and helping them to see through the cages that they've created for themselves. So
it's wonderful.
I'm on Facebook, Dylan Charles Hunt on Facebook. You can check that out. Waking Times is on Facebook. You can go to wakingtimes.com.
Which I highly recommend, guys. I love Waking Times, and maybe you're not publishing as much, but go back and read everything that Dylan.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot.
Really amazing.
Got close to 12,000 articles up there.
Yeah.
So, but dylancharlescoaching.com, absolutely sign up for my newsletter and book a free call with me if you like. And then also at my coaching page, you'll see there's a couple of programs I'm offering coming up in the next couple of weeks. One for overcoming self-sabotage, and I'm also doing a course on emotional self-mastery with another conscious academy. So I'm happy to be partnering with them. So that's all going to be on the website. So yeah, check that out. And Max, it's been a real tremendous joy and an honor being on your show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's been my honor to have you here. And, if you're willing, I'd love to have you back. I don't think we've just scratched the surface here. So I'd love to do a few more upcoming.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I love, I live for conversations like this. So thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And so until next time.
All right.